She knew stealing the diamond was insane, but resisting the pull towards the thief with the dangerous eyes felt impossible. In a world of glittering wealth and ruthless security, two experts on opposite sides of the law find their meticulously planned heist unraveling into something far more perilous, an attraction as undeniable as it is reckless. They chase a legendary prize worth a fortune, navigating a treacherous path where every ally could be a foe, and every calculated move risks exposing the raw, forbidden connection sparking between them. It's a dangerous game, where the heart's desire might be the ultimate vulnerability. Hello and a warm welcome, amazing viewers. I'm your storyteller Morgan, and I hope this message finds you well. Before we dive into this incredible journey, if you crave stories about intense romance, real undeniable chemistry, and how a single moment can change everything, you're in the perfect place. If you want a soul-stirring, pulse-pounding love story that lingers long after, be sure to watch until the very end. You won't want to miss a single moment. It's going to be so worth it. So if you haven't yet, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Let's dive into this unforgettable story together. Chapter 1. The silence of Elysium wasn't empty. It was a pressurized chamber. AISHA Vance moved through its vast minimalist expanse, her footsteps sharp, precise clicks against the glacial white marble. The morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic, untouchable views of the manicured grounds, and the distant city skyline fell in clean geometric slabs. It illuminated dust motes dancing in sterile air, the only movement beyond her own. The scent was faintly antiseptic, undercut by the expensive cool notes of her perfume, vetiver and ice. It was the smell of absolute control. She paused before one of the windows, her reflection a flawless monochrome study. The severe cut of her black suit, the sharp angle of her cheekbones, the obsidian gleam of her eyes, currently scanning reports projected onto a discrete pane of smart glass. Vance Dynamics had just finalized the acquisition of Viridian Tech, a brutal, necessary maneuver. The board meeting replaying in her mind was a symphony of subdued tension, sharp glances, and her own unwavering commands delivered in a voice like polished steel. Competitors were variables to be managed or eliminated. Employees were assets, valued for efficiency and silence. Emotions, inefficiencies best excised. Wealth was her fortress, her weapon, and her isolation. Satisfaction, when it came, was a cold, hard thing, fitting neatly into the meticulously ordered grid of her existence. Turning from the window, the vastness of the open-plan living area felt less like luxury and more like a curated void. The hum of the climate control was the only sound, a constant, low thrum that vibrated in her bones. She crossed to the sleek, uncluttered kitchen, poured mineral water into a heavy crystal glass. The coldness seeped into her palm. Control, always control. Later, drawn to the study overlooking the western gardens, a view chosen for its lack of distraction, just sculpted hedges and gravel paths, a flicker of unexpected movement caught her eye. Far below, kneeling amidst a riot of newly planted delphiniums, was a figure, the gardener, the new one. She'd approved his file weeks ago, Levi Wright. Qualifications adequate, references clean, background unremarkable, an asset, categorized and filed, yet seeing him now was different. Sunlight, warmer here than in her sterile interior, gilded the sweat-dampened nape of his neck as he worked. His hands, encased in worn leather gloves, moved with a deliberate, unhurried care, turning the dark, rich earth. He wasn't hacking or rushing, he was coaxing. There was a quiet reverence in the curve of his spine, the focused tilt of his head, the snip-snip of his pruning shears, a sound usually absorbed by the estate's vastness, reached her somehow, a softer counterpoint to the humming silence. He wore a faded gray t-shirt, sleeves pushed up, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle, tanned a deep gold by hours spent under the open sky. His hair, the color of sun-bleached wheat, was tousled, falling slightly over his forehead. He looked rooted, an alien concept in her world of shifting markets and virtual landscapes. AISHA observed him for longer than necessary, her analytical mind attempting to slot this observation back into its box. Asset, gardener, efficiency, methodical, distraction level minimal, yet a faint dissonance vibrated beneath the categorization. His stillness wasn't the deferential stillness of her staff. It was innate, natural. It belonged to the earth he tended. She turned away, dismissing the flicker of something irrelevant. Days passed in the usual rhythm of power and precision. Yet, Elysium felt subtly altered. She found herself taking the long way to her study, her gaze inevitably drawn to the western gardens. Levi was a constant, quiet presence. She noted the way sunlight caught the fine dusting of soil on his arms as he lifted heavy sacks of mulch, the unhurried grace of his stride as he moved between flower beds, the flex of his shoulders beneath the thin cotton of his shirt. Once, walking along a path he was weeding, she passed close enough to catch a scent: warm skin, sun-baked earth, crushed greenery, and something clean, like rain on dry ground. It was startlingly visceral, a punch of raw life in her curated atmosphere. She didn't pause, didn't acknowledge him, but the scent lingered in her nostrils long after. He rarely looked up as she passed, his focus seemingly absolute on his task. But she felt it, a subtle shift in the air, a brief stillness in his movements as her shadow fell near. Was he aware? Did he register her presence beyond the employer passing by? The uncertainty was an unwelcome itch beneath her skin. One afternoon, the weight of an unforeseen complication with the Viridian tech integration pressed down. A critical supplier had balked at the new Vance-imposed terms. The cold satisfaction of the acquisition curdled into a sharp, metallic frustration. The boardroom, even in memory, felt suffocating. The pristine silence of Elysium, usually a balm, suddenly felt oppressive, echoing her internal tension. She needed, not space, but a different kind of quiet. Without conscious decision, her feet carried her away from the main house, down a less trodden gravel path, overhung by ancient oaks, towards the estate's forgotten corner, the Victorian greenhouse. It was her one concession to sentimentality, a relic from the previous owner she hadn't demolished. She rarely visited. It was a place of unchecked life, tangled vines and dusty panes, chaos barely contained, a symbol of everything she suppressed. Pushing open the heavy, creaking door, she was enveloped by a wall of humid, green-scented air. It was thick, alive, cloying after the sterile atmosphere of the house. Sunlight, fractured by dirty glass and encroaching foliage, dappled the cracked stone floor. Ferns unfurled with reckless abandon. A riot of orchids, long neglected, clung to moss-covered bark. The air hummed faintly with insect life. It was beautiful, in a wild, untamed way that unsettled her meticulously ordered soul. She walked deeper into the verdant gloom, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves intensifying. The frustration from the meeting coiled tighter, a serpent in her chest. The sheer inefficiency of the supplier's resistance, the potential delay, it gnawed at her. She leaned back against a cool, grimy glass pane, the rough texture of the old putty grounding her slightly. Closing her eyes, she pressed her fingertips to her temples, trying to force the chaotic thoughts into submission. Control it, analyze, dominate, but the numbers blurred, replaced by the infuriating image of the supplier's smug negotiator. The pressure built, a physical ache behind her eyes, a constriction in her throat. She took a slow, deep breath, the humid air feeling thick and useless in her lungs. And then, the unthinkable happened. A single point of heat pricked behind her eyelids, a treacherous betrayer. Before she could clamp down, lock it away, a single tear escaped. It traced a slow, burning path down the sharp plane of her cheekbone, leaving a faint, damp track through her immaculate foundation. Mortification, hot and instant, flooded her. She froze, eyes snapping open, but it was too late. Silence, thick and charged. Then, a soft intake of breath. She turned her head, a viper uncoiling. He stood near the doorway she hadn't heard open, silhouetted against the brighter light outside. Levi. He held a coil of rope and a pair of heavy-duty shears. His eyes, the color of sun-warmed oak, weren't wide with shock, but filled with a profound, unnerving stillness. They weren't looking at Vance Dynamics' CEO. They were looking at her, at the raw vulnerability etched on her face, at the undeniable evidence of the tear. His gaze held hers, not with pity, but with a deep, silent understanding that felt like an intrusion, a violation of her deepest sanctuary. He saw the crack in the armor. He saw her, time suspended. The humid air crackled. How dare he? The thought roared through her, a white-hot fury chasing the mortification. Fury at him for witnessing her weakness, fury at herself for the lapse, fury at the tear itself. But beneath the molten rage, something else pulsed, terrifying and undeniable, a jolt of pure, electric connection. He saw her, not the billionaire, not the icon of control, but the woman beneath, momentarily adrift. That recognition, unwanted and profound, struck her with the force of a physical blow. Her mask slammed back into place, colder and harder than ever. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted, the vulnerability instantly buried under layers of glacial command. Her obsidian eyes fixed on him, radiating icy fury. "What are you doing here?" Her voice, when it came, was a whip crack in the humid silence, devoid of any tremor, honed to a killing edge. "This area is off limits." Levi didn't flinch, though his knuckles tightened slightly on the rope. His gaze didn't waver, but the intense understanding softened into something wary, respectful.
He held up the shears slightly. "The storm forecast, ma'am. High winds predicted overnight. Came to secure the loose panes on the east side." His voice was low, calm, carrying the faint rasp of someone who spoke more to plants than people. It washed over her, an unwelcome contrast to her own sharpness. He gestured slightly with his head towards the far end of the greenhouse. Didn't mean to intrude. The calmness infuriated her further. It felt like a counterpoint to her own unraveling. "Intrusion is the result, regardless of intent," she snapped, the words brittle. "Your duties are confined to the exterior gardens. This structure is not your concern." She pushed off the glass pane, every movement radiating controlled fury. "Leave, now." There was no defiance, but a quiet steadiness that somehow amplified her sense of exposure. He saw the fury, and he saw what lay beneath it. He simply nodded, a small curt dip of his head. "Ma'am." He turned, his movements still unhurried, and walked back out into the daylight, pulling the heavy door closed behind him with a soft final thud. AISHA stood rigid in the sudden suffocating silence of the greenhouse. The scent of earth and green life felt cloying now, oppressive. The tear track on her cheek burned like a brand. She wiped at it savagely with the back of her hand, smearing the perfect makeup. The humiliation was a living thing, twisting in her gut. But beneath the fury, beneath the icy determination to reassert control, the seed was sown. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was obsession. An obsession with the feeling he had evoked, the terrifying vulnerability of being seen. An obsession with the man who had witnessed her fortress momentarily breached. He was no longer just an asset, a gardener. He was the witness to her one catastrophic mistake, the keeper of a secret she couldn't afford to exist. She strode out of the greenhouse, the humid air clinging to her like guilt. Back in the sterile chill of the main house, the silence felt different. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the echo of that silent, understanding gaze. The image of Levi, silhouetted in the doorway, his sun-warmed oak eyes seeing too much, was seared onto her mind. She crossed to the window overlooking the western gardens. He was back at work, kneeling among the delphiniums, his movements rhythmic and untroubled. The snip-snip of the shears drifted up, a maddening counterpoint to the frantic, silent storm raging within her. She watched him, not dismissively, not analytically. She watched him with the intense, focused scrutiny she usually reserved for hostile takeover targets. Levi Wright. The name felt heavy, dangerous. He was a problem, an anomaly, a vulnerability. The solution was simple. Remove him, transfer him, fire him, sever the connection, erase the witness. Her fingers tightened on the cold crystal glass in her hand, but she didn't reach for her calm. She didn't summon her assistant. She stood there, a statue of controlled fury in her glass fortress, watching the man who had seen her cry, and felt the first treacherous stirrings of something far more perilous than anger begin to unfurl in the carefully guarded depths of her being. The fortress had been breached, the battle for control had just begun, and the enemy wasn't outside. It was the unnerving quiet of the gardener below, and the terrifying, unwanted echo of her own vulnerability reflected in his eyes. The seed of obsession, watered by humiliation, and the forbidden thrill of being truly seen, had taken root.
Chapter 2. The tear was a brand. AISHA scrubbed at her cheekbone, long after the phantom sting had faded, the action sharp and punishing against her skin. The sterile air of her home office offered no solace. Spreadsheets blurred. The projected cityscape beyond the window seemed a mocking grid of conquered territory that suddenly felt hollow. Levi Wright's face, that moment of devastating clarity in his sun-warmed oak eyes, was imprinted behind her eyelids. He'd seen, not the CEO, the fortress, but the fracture beneath. The humiliation was a cold, hard knot in her chest, sharpened by the terrifying echo of that electric jolt, the shock of being truly known, however briefly. Removal was the logical solution. Efficient, final, a single encrypted message to HR, terminate contract, grounds, intrusion of private space, immediate effect. Her finger hovered over the send key. The image of him kneeling amidst the delphiniums, sunlight gilding the sweat on his neck, flashed unbidden, the deliberate care in his hands. The quiet snip-snip that had somehow pierced her curated silence. Her finger trembled, not with weakness, she told herself fiercely, with unresolved strategic assessment. Firing him immediately might draw attention, questions, speculation about why the gardener was dismissed after being found in the greenhouse. Gossip was a virus she couldn't afford. Observe, a colder, more calculating voice whispered within the storm of her fury. Assess the vulnerability, then neutralize. Thus began the silent siege, not against Levi, but against the unwelcome tempest he'd unleashed within her. Control reasserted itself, but it was a brittle shell, constantly under pressure. She became a ghost haunting her own estate, drawn magnetically to the periphery of his work, She took breakfast on the west terrace, a ritual she usually despised for its exposure. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew-damp grass and distant earth. Her tablet displayed market reports, but her gaze, again and again, snagged on the figure moving with unhurried purpose near the rose arbor. Levi, pruning with meticulous focus. He didn't look up, not once, yet when she shifted in her chair, the scrape of wrought iron on stone seemed to ripple through the air. His hand paused mid-snip, just for a heartbeat. Then the rhythmic clipping resumed. He feels it too, the traitorous thought whispered, this tension. She slammed her coffee cup down, the sharp clatter startling a nearby bird into flight. Irritation flared, at him, at herself, at the damn birds. Her walks became strategic reconnaissance. She chose paths that skirted his current projects, the herb garden near the kitchen, the newly seeded patch by the old oak. She moved with her usual precision, chin high, gaze fixed ahead, an island of impeccable composure, yet her senses were hyper-alert, attuned to every rustle, every shift in the air currents around him. Passing within 10 feet of him as he dug a trench for irrigation lines, the scent hit her like a physical blow. Warm skin, sun-baked earth, the clean green tang of crushed mint clinging to his boots. It was raw, vital, utterly alien to the filtered, perfumed atmosphere of her world. Her breath hitched, a tiny, betraying catch she hoped the breeze masked. She didn't turn her head, but her peripheral vision registered the slight tightening of his shoulders, the way the muscles in his forearm corded as he drove the spade deeper. Proximity was a live wire. The greenhouse became her unintended obsession, the site of her shame, yet the only place that didn't feel oppressively sterile. She began visiting daily, cloaking it in the guise of assessment. She'd stand rigidly in the humid center aisle, arms crossed, surveying the burgeoning chaos Levi was slowly wrestling into order. Vines were being trained, dead growth cleared, the cracked stone floor swept. The air remained thick with the scent of damp soil and burgeoning life, but now undercut with the sharper aroma of cut stems and the mineral tang of the fertilizer he used. He worked steadily, seemingly absorbed, acknowledging her presence only with a murmured "ma'am" when she entered or left. But the silence between them wasn't empty. It was thick, charged, vibrating with everything unsaid. One afternoon, frustration over a stalled negotiation gnawed at her. She stalked into the greenhouse, the humid air instantly clinging to her silk blouse. Levi was high on a ladder, securing a loose pane frame. The sight arrested her, the stretch of his worn work shirt across his back, the defined muscles of his shoulders working as he tightened a bolt. Sunlight streamed through the newly cleaned glass, illuminating dust motes dancing around him like gold dust. He glanced down, his gaze meeting hers for a fleeting second before returning to his task. That brief connection sent a jolt through her, low and unsettling. "Progress is slow," she stated, her voice colder than intended, a defense against the unwelcome heat flooding her veins. She gestured vaguely at the still wild jasmine threatening to engulf a support beam. He paused, looking down again, a ghost of something, amusement, challenge, flickering in his eyes. "Some things can't be rushed, ma'am," he said, his voice calm, raspy. He tapped the jasmine vine gently with his wrench. "Force it, you break it. Gotta let it find its way." He held her gaze for a beat longer than necessary. Stronger that way. The double entendre hung in the humid air. Was he talking about the vine? Or her? Her cheeks warmed, flirting, the audacity. Yet the observation about strength resonated with something buried deep. Strength without control is chaos, she countered, lifting her chin. Unchecked growth leads to ruin. He descended the ladder with easy grace, landing lightly on the stone floor a few feet from her. The proximity was deliberate, intimate in the green gloom. He smelled of warm metal, sweat, and that damned clean earth scent. "Control ain't the same as stifling," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. He nodded towards a delicate white orchid he'd painstakingly mounted on a bark slab, its roots carefully arranged. It had been near death when she'd last seen it. Now a single, perfect bud was forming. "Sometimes," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "you gotta trust the roots. Give 'em space, the right light." He met her eyes, a direct, unnerving look. Beauty finds a way to bloom, even where you least expect it. Her breath stopped, the air crackled. Was he comparing her to the orchid, implying she needed space, light? Her carefully constructed walls felt paper-thin. The urge to retreat, to reassert her authority with icy dismissal, warred violently with a terrifying impulse to step closer, to see if his eyes held the same unnerving understanding they had that day. "Beauty is irrelevant to function," she managed, her voice tight. "Survival is paramount." A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Maybe, ma'am," he conceded, but his gaze drifted pointedly to the vibrant green life surrounding them, then back to her face.
But surviving ain't the same as living. He picked up his toolbox. "Excuse me, need to check the seedlings." He moved past her, his arm brushing lightly against her silk sleeve. The contact was brief, accidental, yet it burned like a brand. She stood rooted long after he disappeared into the deeper foliage, her heart hammered against her ribs. Surviving ain't the same as living. The words echoed in the verdant silence, unsettlingly profound. Her life was a series of controlled victories, sterile triumphs. When was the last time she'd felt alive? Not since. She couldn't remember. The realization was a fresh wave of humiliation. He'd breached her defenses again, not with pity, but with a quiet, undeniable truth wrapped in the guise of banter about plants. It felt like being stripped bare. The silent offerings began the next day. A single, perfect crimson camellia, its petals velvety and flawless, placed on the stone bench near the greenhouse door where she usually stood. No note, just the flower, vibrant against the grey stone. She stared at it, fury warring with a treacherous flicker of pleasure. It was an overture, a silent apology, or a continuation of his subtle, maddening campaign. She left it there. It was gone the next morning, replaced by a sprig of intensely fragrant lavender tucked into the handle of the main greenhouse door. She plucked it out, the scent heady and calming despite her agitation, and crushed it in her fist before dropping it onto the path. An offering rejected, yet the scent lingered on her skin. Days blurred into a torturous dance. She found herself structuring her work around his schedule, a humiliating capitulation she refused to acknowledge. If he was pruning the topiary near the study windows in the afternoon, she'd be at her desk, her gaze drifting constantly to the window. She'd see the flex of his back, the concentration on his face, the way he'd occasionally push his hair back with a forearm, leaving a smudge of soil on his temple. Once he looked up, directly at the window. She froze, caught. He didn't smile, didn't wave. He simply held her gaze for 3 agonizing heartbeats, his expression unreadable, before turning back to the hedge. The heat that flooded her face was mortifying. The greenhouse remained their primary battleground. She arrived one morning to find him repotting a massive, ancient fern. The terracotta pot was huge, cumbersome, need a hand steadying it. The question was out before she could stop it, spurred by a ridiculous impulse to, what? Prove she wasn't just an observer, show strength. He paused, surprise flickering across his features. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, leaving another earthy streak. "Could use an anchor, ma'am," he admitted, a hint of that challenging glint back in his eyes. "If you're sure, it's heavy. I'm capable," she stated coolly, stepping forward, ignoring the frantic flutter in her chest. She positioned her hands on the cool, gritty rim of the pot opposite him. Their fingers didn't touch, but the proximity was electric. She could see the pulse beating in the hollow of his throat, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting in the sun. He smelled overwhelmingly of damp earth and warm male exertion. It was intoxicating and terrifying. "On 3, he said, his voice low, focused. 1, 2, 3. For a precarious moment, the pot tilted. Instinctively, her hand shot out to steady it, landing not on the rim, but directly over his. His skin was warm, rough with calluses, solid. A jolt of pure, unadulterated sensation shot up her arm, stealing her breath. Their eyes locked over the fronds of the fern. Time stopped. The humid air pressed in, thick and suffocating. She saw the shock in his eyes, mirroring her own, quickly followed by a heat that made her knees weak. He didn't pull his hand away. Her own recoil was violent. She snatched her hand back as if burned, the pot lurching dangerously. He grunted, muscles bulging as he wrestled it back to stability, and lowered it onto the trolley. Silence stretched, taut and humming. The spot where her skin had touched his pulsed. "Apologies," she forced out, her voice clipped, devoid of any inflection, betraying nothing of the earthquake within. "I miscalculated the weight." He straightened, breathing slightly harder, his gaze fixed on her. There was no anger, only that unnerving intensity. "No harm done," he said quietly. He rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes never leaving hers. "Stronger than you look. A beat, ma'am." It wasn't flirting, it was an observation, a statement of fact. Yet, coupled with the lingering heat in his gaze, it felt like the most intimate thing he'd ever said. Her composure felt like shattered glass held together by sheer will. She turned on her heel and walked out, the humid air of the greenhouse suddenly feeling like a physical barrier she had to escape. She didn't look back. That night, in the vast, cold emptiness of her bedroom, the memory of his hand under hers replayed on a loop. The roughness, the heat, the sheer, shocking solidity of him, the look in his eyes, not deference, but a raw mutual awareness that stripped away every pretense. She traced the spot on her palm where she'd touched him. It still tingled. Self-loathing warred with a desperate, clawing need she couldn't name. He wasn't just a witness anymore. He was a catalyst, a mirror reflecting a hollow existence she could no longer ignore, and the reflection was terrifyingly alluring. She began to notice the changes he wrought beyond the greenhouse. Neat, winding paths appeared through previously neglected thickets, inviting exploration. Wild, native flowers, coneflowers, black-eyed Susans began to edge the manicured lawns, adding unexpected bursts of color. He'd leave small whimsical arrangements on her terrace table, a twist of willow with bright berries, a smooth river stone balanced on moss. Silent gifts she never acknowledged, but never discarded. They appeared like messages in a code she couldn't quite decipher, yet felt compelled to collect. The cold voice of control screamed for termination. He's an employee. He saw you weak. He touches you. He unsettles you. Remove the variable. The other voice, a quieter, more insistent hum, whispered of sunlight on skin, of the scent of earth, of the shocking warmth of his hand, of the unnerving truth in his words. Surviving ain't the same as living. And that look that saw through her.
She stood at her study window, watching him water the newly seeded patch under the late afternoon sun. He moved with that innate, unhurried grace, the spray from the hose catching the light, creating a shimmering rainbow halo around him. The snip-snip was absent today, replaced by the gentle hiss of water. A strange, unfamiliar ache bloomed in her chest, a yearning so profound it stole her breath. It wasn't just desire, though that pulsed hot and undeniable beneath the surface. It was a longing for the quiet certainty he possessed, for the connection to something real and growing, for the terrifying vulnerability that came with being truly seen, and perhaps not rejected. He straightened, sensing her gaze perhaps, and turned slowly towards the house. He couldn't see her through the tinted glass. She knew that. Yet he lifted a hand, not in a wave, but in a simple, slow acknowledgement, a silent salute to the unseen observer. AISHA didn't move. The fortress walls felt thinner than ever. The siege wasn't weakening her resolve. It was transforming the battleground. The enemy wasn't Levi Wright. The enemy was the life she'd built, the sterile perfection that now felt like a gilded cage. And the gardener, with his sun-warmed skin, his quiet understanding, and his devastatingly simple truths, held the key. The realization was a terrifying liberation. The battle for control was no longer about keeping him out. It was about whether she dared to let him in. The silent siege had breached the outer walls. The citadel of her heart was next, and she had no idea if she possessed the strength or the will to defend it. Chapter 3. The heavy, perfumed air of the Viridian Gala clung to Leo like a second skin, thick with the scent of rare orchids, expensive champagne, and the underlying tang of desperation disguised as ambition. Across the crowded ballroom, shimmering under the light of 1,000 crystal droplets, AISHA moved like smoke through water. Her emerald gown, chosen specifically to blend with the wealthy foliage of Viridian's elite, seemed to drink the light and reflect it only in her sharp, observant eyes. Leo adjusted his own impeccably tailored tuxedo, feeling the reassuring weight of the miniature signal jammer sewn into the lining near his ribs. Tonight wasn't about blending in, it was about controlled disruption. Their target, the infamous Serpent's Eye diamond, sat encased in bulletproof glass atop a velvet pedestal in the center of the room. Security, thick as the humidity outside, pulsed around it. Men in dark suits with earpieces, their eyes constantly scanning the glittering throng. Getting close required finesse, distraction, and a carefully orchestrated dance of misdirection. AISHA was the distraction. Leo was the sleight of hand. He caught her gaze as she paused near a towering ice sculpture of a phoenix. A flicker of understanding passed between them, communicated in the slight tilt of her head, the almost imperceptible tightening of her lips. Phase 1. Engage. Leo took a deep breath, the scent of champagne suddenly cloying, and began his own measured circuit towards the bar, positioning himself strategically near the service entrance to the kitchens, their planned exit route, should things go sideways, which, knowing their luck, they inevitably would. AISHA's laughter, bright and slightly mocking, cut through the orchestral drone. She'd cornered Lord Harrington, a notoriously vain industrialist, known for his susceptibility to flattery and his proximity to the security console. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, her head tilted back as if enraptured by his undoubtedly tedious monologue about vintage airships. Leo watched, a strange mixture of professional admiration and possessive irritation tightening his chest. She was brilliant, too brilliant. Harrington was already puffing out his chest, his eyes glazing over with self-importance, completely oblivious to the subtle pressure AISHA was exerting, guiding him step by imperceptible step towards the eastern pillar, conveniently blocking the direct line of sight from the main security station to the Serpent's Eye. "See something you like, Mr. Vance?" A smooth, feminine voice purred beside Leo. He turned to find Lady Cassandra Thorne, wife of the gala's host, regarding him with unnervingly sharp eyes over the rim of her champagne flute. Her gaze flickered towards AISHA and Harrington, or perhaps someone. Leo summoned his most charming empty smile, the one reserved for navigating treacherous social waters, merely admiring the ice sculpture, Lady Thorne. "Exquisite craftsmanship, almost as breathtaking as your event." He gestured vaguely towards the phoenix. Cassandra's lips curved, unimpressed. "Spare me the flattery, Mr. Vance. I know a professional when I see one, and your companion over there, she moves like a thief." Her voice dropped lower, or perhaps a spider, weaving a very pretty web. The air crackled with unspoken threat. Leo's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression blandly amused. "High praise indeed, Lady Thorne, though I assure you, AISHA is simply captivated by Lord Harrington's unique perspective on dirigibles, an acquired taste, I find." He took a sip of his own drink, the bubbles sharp on his tongue, unlike the undeniable allure of your husband's collection, particularly the centerpiece tonight, truly mesmerizing. Cassandra's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing him. The Serpent's Eye has a way of drawing unwelcome attention. One must be vigilant. Her gaze lingered on him, heavy with suspicion. "Enjoy the gala, Mr. Vance. Do try not to get lost in the crowd." She melted away as swiftly as she'd appeared, leaving Leo with a cold knot of unease in his stomach. They were marked. He caught AISHA's eye again, a subtle flick of her fingers near her hip. "Trouble. Proceed." Harrington, thoroughly distracted, was now pontificating loudly to a small, trapped-looking group near the pillar. The path was clear. Phase 2. Leo moved, not towards the diamond, but towards the grand piano, where a musician played languid jazz. He bumped lightly into a waiter carrying a tray laden with flutes. The collision was perfectly calculated. Glass shattered spectacularly on the polished marble floor, champagne arcing through the air like liquid gold. A collective gasp rose, dozens of heads snapping towards the commotion. Security personnel instinctively shifted their focus towards the sudden chaos. Now, Leo activated the jammer with a discreet press against his ribs. The subtle hum of electronics around the diamond's case faltered for a critical half-second. The infrared sensors, the pressure plates under the pedestal, the live feed to the central security hub. It was the digital equivalent of a blink. AISHA was already moving. While every eye was on the champagne disaster, she flowed past the preoccupied guards near the pillar, her gown whispering against the floor. Her hand, seemingly reaching to steady herself against the pedestal after a stumble caused by the commotion, brushed the reinforced glass. A small disc-shaped device, thinner than a playing card and matte black, adhered instantly to the underside of the velvet lip. Phase 3. The switch. Inside the disc, microscopic manipulators whirred to life, targeting the diamond's pressure-sensitive mounting. Leo, playing the flustered gentleman apologizing profusely to the waiter and surrounding guests, kept his peripheral vision locked on AISHA. He saw the slight tension in her shoulders, the controlled stillness as the device did its work. Seconds stretched into agonizing eternities. Then, she straightened, her hand leaving the pedestal, a faint, relieved sigh ghosting across her lips. The diamond still sat gleaming under the lights, but Leo knew. The real Serpent's Eye was now nestled securely within the disc. The one on display was a flawless, pre-planted replica. Phase 3 complete. He disengaged from the cleanup scene, murmuring apologies, and began moving towards the pre-arranged rendezvous point, a secluded alcove hidden behind a curtain of trailing jasmine vines near the terrace doors. The heavy scent of the flowers mixed cloyingly with the lingering champagne and perfume. AISHA was already there, her back pressed against the cool marble wall, her chest rising and falling slightly faster than usual. Her eyes were wide, exhilarated, in the dim light filtering through the leaves. "Smooth moves with the waiter, Vance," she breathed, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time that evening. "Very splashy. Had to match the occasion," Leo murmured, stepping close, the alcove shrinking around them. The noise of the gala was muffled here, replaced by the frantic thud of his own heart and the whisper of her breath. "You looked quite absorbed in Harrington's treatise on buoyancy." AISHA scoffed softly, tilting her head up. "The things I endure for a shiny rock." His breath smelled like pickled herring and entitlement. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his lapel, ostensibly adjusting it. "Did you see Lady Viper? She circled you like a shark." "Noticed," Leo said, catching her hand before she could pull it away. His thumb traced the back of her knuckles. "She knows we're trouble. We need to vanish. Now," but he didn't move. The adrenaline, the closeness, the sheer audacity of what they'd just pulled off thrummed between them like a live wire. "Vanishing sounds terribly final," AISHA murmured.
her gaze dropping to his lips, then back up, holding his with an intensity that made the gilded cage of the gala fade away. We just pulled off the impossible. Shouldn't we celebrate? Briefly. Celebrations attract attention, AISHA, Leo countered, but his voice was rough, lacking conviction. He leaned in slightly, drawn by the magnetic pull of her presence, the intoxicating mix of danger and desire. The scent of jasmine was suddenly overwhelming. And we have a very expensive paperweight in your clever little device. She feigned offense, stepping impossibly closer until the emerald silk of her gown brushed against his trousers. It's a masterpiece of illicit engineering, darling. Show some respect. Her free hand came up, her fingertips lightly tracing the line of his jaw. Besides, a little attention might be fun. We could give Lady Thorne something truly scandalous to report. Her touch sent sparks along his nerves. He could feel the heat radiating from her. Tempting, he admitted, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. He dipped his head, his lips hovering dangerously close to hers, but highly impractical. Security will realize the feed was disrupted. They'll start looking for anomalies, like us, hiding in the foliage. Who's hiding? AISHA challenged, her breath warm against his skin. Her eyes sparkled with mischief and something deeper, hotter. I'm merely appreciating the architecture and the company. She closed the minuscule distance, her lips brushing his, not quite a kiss, but a promise, an electric shock of contact. Is this impractical enough for you? Mores, Leo groaned, a low sound torn between frustration and surrender. He captured her lips properly then, a hard claiming kiss fueled by adrenaline and the long-suppressed tension that had crackled between them since this job began. It was fierce, desperate, a collision of lips and tongues that spoke of shared danger and undeniable attraction. Her arm slid around his neck, pulling him closer, her body molding against his. The stolen diamond, the watching vipers, the entire gala ceased to exist. There was only the taste of champagne on her lips, the softness of her skin beneath his fingers tangling in the hair at her nape, the intoxicating scent of jasmine and AISHA. The sharp crackle of a security radio nearby shattered the moment like glass. They sprang apart, breathing ragged, eyes wide. Reality slammed back with the force of a tidal wave. Flashing lights pulsed against the terrace windows, police or private security vehicles arriving outside. The disruption had been noticed. The hunt was on. Time to go, Leo rasped, his voice thick. He grabbed her hand, pulling her deeper into the alcove, towards the service door disguised as part of the ornate paneling. He fumbled for the electronic lockpick in his pocket. That, AISHA gasped, straightening her gown with trembling hands, a flush high on her cheeks, was very impractical and terribly unprofessional. A wild grin split her face. Do try to be more focused next time, Vance. Next time, Leo muttered, working the lockpick with practice speed. Remind me to choose a job with less distracting colleagues. The lock clicked softly. He pushed the door open, revealing a dimly lit, utilitarian corridor smelling of grease and stale bread, the service artery of the mansion. The roar of the gala vanished, replaced by the distant clatter of pans and the hum of industrial appliances. They slipped through, closing the door silently behind them. The sudden shift from opulent ballroom to gritty service corridor was jarring. Gone were the chandeliers and silk. Here were concrete floors, exposed pipes, and the lingering smell of dishwater. They moved swiftly, silently, sticking to the shadows cast by stacked crates and industrial shelving. Phase 4, evasion. Left at the next junction, AISHA whispered, her earlier flirtation replaced by cool efficiency, though her hand still felt electric in his. Leads to the old stables. Our exits prepped there. They navigated the maze-like corridors, senses hyper-alert. Twice they froze, pressing flat against cold walls as security guards passed, radios squawking with reports of the diamond's inexplicable sensor glitch and the suspicious characters near the terrace. Each time, their hearts hammered against their ribs, the stolen diamond a burning secret against AISHA's skin, where the disc was concealed within a specially designed seam in her bodice. Finally, they reached a heavy rusted metal door marked stables out of order. Leo forced it open with a grating screech that sounded deafening in the silence. Beyond lay the cavernous space of the old carriage house, now filled with dusty tarps covering forgotten vehicles and gardening equipment. Rain lashed against high, grimy windows, the storm that had threatened all evening finally breaking with fury. The sound was a roaring counterpoint to their ragged breathing. Parked near the far end, under a top that had been partially pulled back, sat their escape, a sleek, unmarked motorcycle, its black paint gleaming faintly in the gloom. Leo tossed AISHA a helmet. Hope you don't mind getting wet, Spider. Better wet than caught, magician, she shot back, securing her helmet and swinging a leg over the bike behind him. Her arms wrapped tightly around his waist, a different kind of intimacy now, one born of necessity and shared flight. He could feel the hard edge of the disc through her dress and his jacket. The serpent's eye. Their ticket out of this mess and into a whole new world of complications. He kicked the engine to life. The roar echoed in the cavernous space, impossibly loud. Immediately, shouts came from the direction of the main house, followed by the beam of a powerful flashlight cutting through the rain-streaked windows near the door they'd just used. Leo didn't hesitate. He gunned the throttle. The bike shot forward, tires spitting gravel. He aimed for the large wooden delivery doors at the far end of the stables. They were chained shut, but Leo knew the lock was old, the chain corroded. He accelerated, bracing himself. "Hold on," he shouted. Aisha's grip tightened. Her body pressed flush against his back. The bike hit the doors with a splintering crash. Wood gave way, the chain snapping like thread. They burst out into the driving rain and the ink-black night, leaving the chaos of the Viridian Gala behind them in a shower of splinters and the fading shouts of pursuit. Cold rain instantly plastered Leo's hair beneath his helmet and streamed down his face. The wind whipped at them as the bike surged forward onto the slick, winding driveway leading away from the mansion. Behind them, headlights pierced the downpour, security vehicles giving chase, sirens beginning to wail, a discordant counterpoint to the motorcycle's powerful thrum. Leo leaned into the curves, the bike responding like an extension of his will. AISHA clung to him, her presence a solid anchor in the swirling chaos. He took a sharp, unmarked turn off the main drive, plunging them onto a muddy, overgrown path that cut through the estate's neglected woods. Branches whipped at them, leaves heavy with rain slapping against their visors. The pursuing headlights hesitated, then veered away, unable or unwilling to follow onto the treacherous track. They rode in silence for several minutes, the roar of the engine and the drumming rain the only sounds. The dense trees offered meager shelter, but the path was rough, demanding all of Leo's concentration. Gradually, the manicured grounds gave way to wilder terrain. The mansion's lights vanished behind the curtain of rain and foliage. The sirens faded into the storm's cacophony. Finally, Leo slowed, bringing the bike to a halt in a small clearing beside a rain-swollen stream. The only light came from the bike's headlamp, cutting a swath through the downpour and the darkness. He killed the engine. The sudden silence was profound, filled only by the relentless hiss of rain on leaves, the gurgle of the stream, and their own harsh breathing. Leo pulled off his helmet, shaking the water from his hair. He turned to look at Aaliyah. She was doing the same, her face pale but exhilarated in the dim light, raindrops clinging to her eyelashes like diamonds. The emerald gown was soaked, clinging to her, ruined beyond repair. She looked magnificent, wild, and utterly alive. "Well," she said, her voice slightly breathless, a grin spreading across her face. That was bracing. Leo couldn't help but return the grin, the tension of the escape slowly ebbing, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and a fierce surge of triumph. He dismounted, offering her a hand. She took it, her fingers cold but strong, and swung off the bike. They stood facing each other in the clearing, the rain plastering their clothes to their bodies, the stolen diamond a secret weight between them. "Bracing," Leo echoed, stepping closer. Water streamed down his face. "I believe the technical term is complete clusterfuck," narrowly avoided. He reached out, tucking a wet strand of hair behind her ear. His touch lingered. "But we got it, Aisha. We actually got it." Her smile softened, her eyes searching his. The flirtatious banter of the gala felt like a lifetime ago, replaced by something raw and real, forged in the crucible of shared risk. "We did," she agreed quietly. Then a spark of the old mischief returned. "Though I maintain your waiter distraction technique needs refinement. Less splash, more subtlety. Next time." "Next time." Leo raised an eyebrow, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, wiping away a rivulet of rain. "Already planning our next heist?" "Maybe," Aisha murmured, leaning into his touch. Her gaze dropped to his lips. "Or maybe I just like the way you handle unexpected complications." She closed the distance between them again. This kiss was different from the frantic one in the alcove. Slower, deeper, tasting of rain and adrenaline and relief. It was a claiming, a promise, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forged in the shadow of the gilded cage and solidified in the cold, wet freedom of the woods. They broke apart, foreheads resting together, breathing the same rain-scented air. The storm still raged around them, but within the small circle of the motorcycle's light, a fragile bubble of warmth and victory held. The serpent's eye was secure, the danger temporarily behind them, and the complicated, exhilarating, dangerous thing blooming between them felt suddenly like the most valuable prize of all. The path ahead was uncertain, muddy, and fraught with new dangers. But for now, in the rain-lashed clearing, with AISHA in his arms and the impossible accomplished, Leo Vance felt invincible. The game had changed. The stakes were higher.
Chapter 4. The rain wasn't falling. It was attacking. It lashed against Leo's exposed face and neck, icy needles driven by a wind that howled through the skeletal trees like a chorus of furious ghosts. The motorcycle's headlight carved a feeble, trembling tunnel through the downpour, illuminating a world reduced to shifting curtains of grey water, slick black branches, and churned mud. Behind them, swallowed by the storm and the dense woods, the wail of sirens had dissolved into the elemental roar, leaving only the frantic thrum of the engine and the drumming on their helmets. Aisha clung to him, her arms a vice around his waist, her body pressed flush against his back, a solid anchor in the swirling chaos, radiating both warmth and the constant thrilling reminder of the stolen fortune sewn into the seam of her ruined gown. Leo navigated by instinct and fragmented memory. This old gamekeeper's track, overgrown and treacherous, was a gamble scribbled on a damp map weeks ago. Each rut threatened to buck them into the slick undergrowth. Each low-hanging branch became a potential garret. Mud sprayed high, coating the bike and their legs. The path seemed to writhe, vanishing and reappearing beneath the relentless deluge. He pushed the machine hard, the engine protesting, the tires fighting for purchase. Speed was their only ally now. Every second widened the gap between them and the organized chaos erupting back at the Viridian estate. "Remind me," Aisha's voice crackled, distorted by the helmet comm in the storm. Whose brilliant idea was the scenic route? My exquisite gown now resembles something dredged from a swamp monster's lair. Despite the complaint, her tone held an edge of exhilaration, the same wild energy that had sparked their kiss in the alcove and fueled their desperate flight. "Yours, Spider," Leo shouted back, leaning into a sharp curve that sent the back tire fishtailing alarmingly before gripping again. "You insisted the main roads would be crawling with Thorn's pet vipers within minutes. Said you knew a quaint little shortcut." He wrestled the handlebars, muscles burning. Forgot to mention the shortcut involved mud wrestling with Mother Nature. "Quaint is subjective, magician," she retorted, her laugh a bright, sharp sound against the storm's bass growl. Her grip tightened as they hit a deep puddle, sending a plume of filthy water cascading over them. "Think of it as rustic ambiance, builds character. Besides, this mud bath is doing wonders for my pores. Lady Thorn pays thousands for treatments less invigorating." He grunted, focusing on a particularly nasty section where the track vanished entirely under runoff from a higher slope. He gunned the engine, aiming for what looked like firmer ground. The bike surged forward, then lurched violently sideways as the rear wheel sank into hidden sludge. Leo fought for control, boots scrabbling on the slick ground, heart hammering against his ribs. For a terrifying second, they teetered on the edge of sliding into a waterlogged ditch choked with brambles. Aisha's arms locked like steel bands. "Left, lean left, you stubborn ass." Her command cut through his panic. He threw his weight, muscles screaming, and the bike, groaning in protest, miraculously found purchase and lurched back onto marginally stable ground. They came to a shuddering halt, engine sputtering, both breathing raggedly. "See?" Aisha gasped, her helmet bumping against his shoulder blade. "Teamwork, my brilliant navigation, your enthusiastic driving." She paused, then added with deliberate sweetness, though perhaps a touch less enthusiasm next puddle. Leo twisted in the saddle, rain streaming down his visor. He could just make out the glint of her eyes behind her own. "You," he stated, voice thick with adrenaline and exertion, "are a menace, a gorgeous, infuriating, swamp-dwelling menace." He reached back, his gloved hand finding her sodden thigh and giving it a brief, hard squeeze. It was part reassurance, part punishment, part something else entirely. "Hold tight, almost there." "Where exactly is there?" she asked, her voice losing some of its teasing edge, replaced by pragmatic concern. "This charming nature trail seems to be heading towards oblivion." "Boathouse," Leo said, kicking the engine back to life. It coughed once, then settled into a ragged idle. "Old river access for the estate, decommissioned years ago. Should be just ahead, near the bend where the stream meets the Viridian River." He nudged the bike forward cautiously. "Our chariot awaits." Minutes later, the path curved sharply, descending towards a wider, faster-flowing expanse of churning brown water, the Viridian River in full spate. Nestled against the crumbling stone riverbank, half hidden by overgrown willows weeping into the torrent, stood a dilapidated wooden structure. The boathouse leaned precariously, its shingled roof sagging, paint long since peeled away by wind and weather. One of the large double doors meant for launching boats hung drunkenly off its hinges. It looked less like a sanctuary, and more like a trap waiting to collapse. "Charming," Aisha deadpanned as Leo killed the engine near the relatively dry patch of earth under the eaves. "Very romantic getaway. Does it come with complimentary tetanus?" "Comes with 4 walls, a roof that mostly doesn't leak, and 0 chance of Thorn's goons stumbling upon it tonight," Leo countered, swinging his leg off the bike and immediately sinking ankle-deep in cold mud. He swore colorfully, pulling his boot free with a sucking sound. "Priorities, Spider." He helped her dismount. Her legs buckled slightly from the hours of tense riding, and she stumbled against him. He caught her, his hands firm on her waist through the soaked silk. For a moment, they stood chest to chest in the howling rain, the boathouse looming behind them like a damp sentinel. Rain plastered her dark hair to her skull, highlighting the elegant lines of her face, pale and smudged with dirt. Her eyes, wide and impossibly green even in the gloom, met his. The memory of their kiss, both in the perfumed alcove and the rain-lashed clearing, hung heavy and electric in the space between them. "Priorities," she echoed softly, not pulling away. Her hands rested lightly on his forearms. "Right now,
Mine involve getting out of this wet dress before I freeze solid, unless you have objections. A faint, challenging smile touched her lips. Leo's breath hitched. The image her words conjured was dangerously potent, a siren song amidst the danger and the cold. He forced a grin, hoping it masked the sudden, intense flare of heat in his gut. Objections, only to the potential delay it might cause in getting us both warm and dry. Lead the way, Spider. Try not to trip over any lurking wildlife. He released her, gesturing towards the broken door. AISHA arched an eyebrow. Wildlife. In this deluge, the only predator I'm worried about is lurking right here. She gave him a look that was pure, unadulterated mischief before turning and picking her way carefully towards the boathouse entrance, the sodden emerald silk clinging to every curve. Leo watched her for a second, shaking his head with a mixture of exasperation and undeniable attraction. Focus, Vance. Diamond first, survival second, then we'll see. He grabbed the saddlebags from the bike and followed her into the damp, echoing gloom. Inside, the boathouse smelled of rotting wood, damp earth, and the faint, fishy tang of the nearby river. Rain drummed a frantic tattoo on the roof, finding its way through gaps to plink into puddles on the uneven concrete floor. The space was cavernous, filled with shadows cast by a single grimy window, high on the far wall. Dusty tarps covered vague, hulking shapes, old rowboats perhaps, or discarded machinery. Near the back, relatively dry under a section of intact roof, stood a rickety wooden table and two mismatched chairs. A small cast-iron stove sat cold and dark in one corner. Home sweet hovel, AISHA declared, shivering violently as she surveyed the space. She immediately moved towards the table, her movements stiff with cold. Right, diamond extraction time. This bodice was not designed for prolonged diamond storage, especially while impersonating a drowned rat. She began fumbling with the intricate fastenings at the back of her gown, her fingers numb and clumsy. Leo dropped the saddlebags near the stove. Here, he said, moving towards her. Let me. Your fingers look like icicles. He stepped behind her, his own hands not much warmer inside his gloves. He peeled them off, tucking them into his pocket, then carefully began working on the tiny hidden hooks and eyes securing the back of the exquisite, now ruined gown. The wet silk was stubborn, his chilled fingers fumbling. The proximity was intimate, charged. He could feel the heat radiating from her back despite the chill, smell the rain and a faint trace of her perfume beneath the mud and river scent. His knuckles brushed against the bare skin just above the gown's low back, eliciting a tiny involuntary shiver from her that had nothing to do with the cold. Steady, magician, she murmured, her voice lower, huskier. Remember the objective, the shiny rock, not the packaging. Packaging is remarkably distracting, Leo admitted gruffly, finally freeing the last clasp. The heavy wet silk slithered down her shoulders and back, pooling around her waist before she caught it. She wore a simple, practical black slip beneath, now equally soaked and clinging. Leo forced his gaze upwards, away from the smooth expanse of her back revealed in the dim light. He focused on the specific seam she indicated near the side of the bodice. AISHA held the gown bunched at her waist with one hand and expertly peeled back a section of the inner lining with the other, revealing a cleverly concealed pocket. With careful fingers, she extracted the small matte black disc, the device that had performed the impossible switch. It looked innocuous, like a large flat button. She placed it carefully on the dusty table surface. "Behold," she whispered, her voice thick with triumph and fatigue, "the serpent's eye, or at least its temporary prison." She pressed a tiny, almost invisible indentation on the disc's edge. With a soft hiss click, a hidden compartment slid open. Nestled within a cradle of microfilaments, catching the faint light like captured fire, lay the diamond. Even in the boathouse gloom, it was breathtaking. Larger than a pigeon's egg, it wasn't just clear, it held depths, facets catching the weak light and fracturing it into cold blue-white fire. It seemed to pulse with an inner light, mesmerizing, hypnotic. The legendary serpent's eye, a fortune beyond imagining, a beacon of danger, their hard-won prize. Leo let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He reached out, not to touch the diamond, but to gently close the protective disc, sealing it away. "It's real," he breathed, the enormity of what they'd done, settling over him like a physical weight. "We actually pulled it off." "We did," AISHA agreed, turning to face him fully. The ruined gown slipped lower, forgotten for a moment. Her eyes, reflecting the diamond's captured fire, held his. The shared triumph, the exhaustion, the lingering adrenaline, and the undeniable pull between them coalesced in the damp, shadowed space. The drumming rain outside seemed to fade, replaced by the sudden loud thudding of his own heart. "Against rather spectacular odds," she added, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Lady Thorne, Harrington's dirigible theories, your waiter assault, the charming countryside tour." He stepped closer, drawn irresistibly. The cold, the damp, the danger outside seemed irrelevant. There was only her, the diamond on the table beside them, and the electric tension humming in the air. "Spectacular," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. That kiss in the rain was pretty spectacular too. Her smile deepened, a knowing feline curve. Unprofessional, she breathed, echoing her earlier accusation, but the word held no sting, only a challenge. Reckless, impractical, utterly, Leo agreed, closing the final distance between them. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away droplets clinging to her cheekbones. Her skin was cold, but her gaze was molten. Best damn distraction I've ever experienced. Only a distraction, she challenged, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, fingers curling into the soaked fabric of his shirt. I thought I was the spider weaving the web, or the menace in the swamp. You're a force of nature, AISHA, he whispered, his lips hovering inches from hers. And right now, distracting me is exactly what I need. This kiss wasn't frantic like the one in the alcove, nor rain-chilled like the one in the clearing. It was slow, deliberate, a deep exploration of heat and relief and burgeoning desire. Her lips parted beneath his, yielding and demanding all at once. Her arms slid around his neck, pulling him closer, her body molding against his with an urgency that banished the last vestiges of cold. The sodden clothes were an irritating barrier, but the heat they generated was intense, intoxicating. Leo's hands slid down her back, tracing the curve of her spine through the thin silk of her slip, pulling her impossibly closer. A low moan escaped her, vibrating against his mouth, fueling the fire coursing through him. The frantic drumming of the rain, the groaning of the old boathouse timbers, the distant rush of the flooded river, it all receded into a muffled backdrop. There was only the taste of her, rainwater, and something uniquely AISHA, the feel of her body pressed against his, strong and vital, the intoxicating scent of damp skin and stolen victory. His fingers tangled in her wet hair, angling her head for deeper access, the kiss deepening, becoming more possessive, more consuming. Her hands roamed his back, then slipped beneath his soaked shirt, her cool fingers tracing the muscles of his back, sending jolts of electricity across his skin. Time lost meaning. They were a tangle of limbs and wet fabric, breathing each other's air, the world outside their desperate embrace, ceasing to exist. The diamond mere inches away on the table, forgotten in the primal heat of their connection. Leo backed her gently against the edge of the heavy wooden table, the solid wood cool against her thighs. His lips trailed down her jaw, to the sensitive hollow of her throat, tasting the rain on her skin. She arched against him, a gasp catching in her throat, her fingers tightening in his hair. Leo, his name on her lips was a ragged breath, a plea and a command. He lifted his head, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were dark pools, pupils blown wide, reflecting the dim light and the raw hunger he felt mirrored in his own soul. The carefully constructed walls of professionalism, the playful banter, the thief and thief dynamic, it all lay in ruins around them, burned away by the intensity of the escape and the undeniable pull between them. Here, in this dilapidated boathouse, soaked to the skin and hunted, something fundamental had shifted. He didn't speak. Words felt inadequate, clumsy. Instead, he leaned in again, capturing her lips in another searing kiss, his hands sliding lower, tracing the curve of her hip, the dip of her waist. Her own hands were busy, fumbling with the buttons of his ruined dress shirt, her touch impatient, desperate. The wet fabric resisted, clinging stubbornly. A sudden sharp crack echoed through the boathouse, distinct from the rain, like a heavy branch snapping under the weight of water. They froze, locked together, breath held. Instincts, honed by years of living on the edge, screamed louder than desire. Leo slowly pulled back, his senses straining against the storm's cacophony. Aishia's eyes darted towards the broken door, wide with sudden alertness, her hands stilling on his chest. Another sound, not a branch, closer, the crunch of gravel under a heavy boot. Outside, desire evaporated, replaced by ice-cold dread. Leo pushed Aishia gently but firmly behind him, his body shielding hers as he scanned the shadows near the entrance. His hand instinctively went to his hip, finding only damp fabric. His backup weapon was in the saddlebag near the stove. Too far. Did we miss a welcoming committee? Aishia whispered, her voice tight with tension. She grabbed the disc containing the diamond from the table, clutching it tightly. Leo didn't answer. He focused, filtering out the rain. Another crunch. Definitely footsteps, approaching cautiously, more than one set. He glanced around the boathouse frantically. The large tarps, the rickety stairs leading up to a loft area, filled with more shadows and junk. The cold stove, nowhere good to hide. Trapped. The broken door creaked, pushed inward. A beam of powerful flashlight cut through the gloom, sweeping across the damp floor, illuminating swirling dust motes. Leo tensed, ready to spring, to fight, knowing it was hopeless, but refusing to go down without fight. Vance? Spider? A familiar gravelly voice cut through the noise. You two drowned rats decent. Relief, sharp and dizzying, washed over Leo. He sagged slightly against the table. Aisha let out a shaky breath beside him. Stepping through the doorway, water streaming off a heavy waxed canvas coat, was Silas. Beside him, looking equally drenched and grim, was Anya. Silas lowered the flashlight, its beam now pointing at the floor, illuminating his weathered face, etched with concern and annoyance. Anya scanned the room, her sharp eyes missing nothing: the discarded gown, the proximity of Leo and AISHA, the disc clutched in AISHA's hand. Silas, Leo managed, his voice rough. Cutting it a bit fine, weren't you? Traffic was hell, Silas grunted, stomping mud off his boots. He surveyed them, taking in their soaked, disheveled state, the intimate tableau they'd frozen in. A slow, knowing smirk spread across his face. Though looks like you two found ways to keep warm. Good to see the mission didn't dampen your spirits entirely. He winked broadly. AISHA smoothly stepped out from behind Leo, the diamond disc disappearing into a pocket of her slip. With practiced ease, she met Silas's smirk with a cool, raised eyebrow. Silas, darling, your timing, as always, is impeccable. We were just discussing the merits of hypothermia versus your scintillating conversation. Anya ignored the banter, her gaze fixed on Leo. The estate is locked down tight. Thorne's security is crawling everywhere, and local police are setting up roadblocks on all major arteries. They know the diamond's gone. They know it was an inside switch. They have descriptions. Her voice was clipped. Professional. We need to move. Now. Silas nodded, pulling a heavy-duty waterproof duffel bag from under his coat. Got your dry gear, and wheels stashed half a mile downstream. Less charming than your motorbike, but less likely to sink in this muck. He tossed the duffel towards Leo. Get changed. Quickly. This place won't stay quiet for long. As Leo and AISHA hastily pulled dry, warm clothes from the duffel, thick sweaters, trousers, waterproof jackets, Silas and Anya kept watch near the door. The earlier intimacy was gone, replaced by the urgent pragmatism of survival. Yet, as Leo pulled a sweater over his head, his eyes met AISHA's across the dim space. She was buttoning a flannel shirt, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline still humming. In that shared glance, silent and intense, passed a world of unspoken understanding, the triumph over the heist, the heat of their embrace, the shared peril, and the sudden jarring return to the harsh reality of their world. The diamond was safe, but they were far from free. The serpent they'd stolen from had fangs, and it was hunting. Dressed and marginally warmer, Leo grabbed the saddlebags containing their gear and the jammer. AISHA secured the diamond disc deep inside a zippered pocket of her new jacket. Silas led the way back out into the punishing rain, Anya taking point, her movements silent and predatory as she scanned the sodden woods. They abandoned the motorcycle, a silent casualty of their escape, and followed Silas down a slippery path along the swollen riverbank. The roar of the water was deafening, the darkness absolute beyond the beams of their flashlights. After 20 minutes of treacherous slogging, slipping on mud and tripping over submerged roots, they reached a small, concealed inlet. Tethered beneath a canopy of dripping willow branches was a sturdy, unmarked inflatable dinghy with a powerful outboard motor. Silas gestured them aboard. Welcome to the Viridian River Cruise, he announced grimly, untying the lines. Next stop, the city. Try not to fall out. The water's a bit frisky tonight. The dinghy bucked violently as they pushed off into the churning current. Anya took the helm, her face set in concentration as she navigated the treacherous flow. Leo and AISHA huddled together in the middle, the small craft feeling terrifyingly fragile against the power of the flooded river. Spray constantly drenched them, the cold biting deep despite their dry clothes. The city lights were a distant, hazy smear through the relentless downpour. AISHA leaned close to Leo, her voice barely audible over the engine and the river's roar. So much for celebrating with champagne and a warm bed. Leo wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her tighter against him for warmth and stability. This is the celebration, Spider, he shouted back, a wry grin touching his lips. Adventure, excitement, the thrilling uncertainty of not being drowned by a minor tributary. She laughed, the sound snatched away by the wind. Your definition of celebration needs serious work, magician. She snuggled closer, her head resting against his chest. Though the company could be worse. High praise indeed, Leo murmured into her rain-slicked hair. He held her, the stolen diamond, a hard lump against his side in her jacket pocket, the river trying its best to swallow them whole, Silas cursing colorfully at the motor, Anya a silent statue of focus at the helm. They were battered, exhausted, hunted, but they were together, and they had the prize. For now, it had to be enough. The city loomed ahead, a jungle of concrete and light, offering its own brand of danger. The gilded cage of the Viridian Gala felt like a lifetime ago. It ended not with a kiss, but with the bone-deep chill of the river, the roar of the outboard, and the precarious, shared warmth of thieves bound by more than just a stolen gem, heading straight into the serpent's coils. The next move was anyone's guess. The lights of the city docks beckoned, promising not sanctuary, but the next phase of the game. The dinghy surged forward, cutting through the dark, churning water, carrying them towards an uncertain dawn, and the debts that came with holding the serpent's eye. The serpent had found its den. The hunt was just beginning.